Aisha was a young girl with a heart full of dreams, but the world around her seemed determined to crush them. She lived in a small, modest house with her stepmother, a woman whose kindness had faded long ago, replaced by bitterness and jealousy. Aisha's father had passed away when she was just a little girl, leaving her in the care of a woman who never truly accepted her. Instead of treating Aisha with the love a mother would give, her stepmother saw her as a reminder of a past she'd rather forget. Every day, Aisha faced the cold silence of a home that was never truly hers. Her stepmother would often mutter under her breath about how burdensome Aisha was, how she had to care for someone else's child while struggling to make ends meet. It wasn't long before her frustrations reached a boiling point. The thought of being tied to a girl who reminded her of a life she hated consumed her thoughts. Aisha was not a child to her stepmother. She was a weight, a responsibility that took away from her own dreams. It was no surprise then when one day her stepmother decided that enough was enough. In a moment of cold calculation, the stepmother decided to rid herself of Aisha. She had heard of a man living on the outskirts of the village, a man who seemed poor, with no family of his own. He lived alone in a tiny cottage, and the villagers spoke little of him, as though his very existence was a mystery. To her stepmother, this man seemed the perfect candidate to take Aisha off her hands. After all, what harm could it do to give her away to someone who could hardly offer anything in return? He might not even care about Aisha, which was exactly what her stepmother wanted. She believed that by sending Aisha to him, she would not only get rid of the girl, but also relieve herself of the responsibility. And so, without a second thought, the decision was made. Aisha would go to this man, and her life as she knew it would be forever changed. Little did her stepmother know, the man she had chosen to discard Aisha to was not what he seemed. And little did Aisha know that this strange twist of fate would lead her on a journey that would turn her life upside down. Aisha's stepmother, though outwardly calm, had been struggling with feelings of resentment for a long time. She had never been able to embrace Aisha as her own, and every day spent under the same roof as her husband's daughter seemed to deepen her frustration. To her, Aisha represented everything she could never have. A life that was not tied to the hardships of poverty. A reminder of the love her husband had given to someone else. The young girl's presence constantly reminded her of her own insecurities, and as much as she tried to hide it, the jealousy she felt was undeniable. Her stepmother's thoughts became darker with time, and the idea of getting rid of Aisha began to consume her. She needed to free herself from the burden of caring for a child who wasn't even hers. Aisha had grown into a beautiful girl, but her presence only seemed to highlight the fact that her stepmother had no true maternal love to offer. The thought of Aisha leaving was, in her mind, the only way to regain control over her life, to rid herself of what felt like an unwanted tie. Then, one day, she overheard a conversation in the market about a man who lived on the outskirts of the village. His name was Ali, and though he was often seen working with his hands and living a simple life, there was an air of mystery about him. The villagers spoke of him in hushed tones, never fully understanding his story. He was a solitary figure, never seen in the company of others, and though he lacked wealth and luxury, there was something undeniably intriguing about him. To the stepmother, he was the perfect solution. He had no family, no apparent wealth, and no status. Surely someone like that would never have the means to take care of Aisha, let alone care for her. The stepmother thought that sending Aisha to him would solve two problems at once. She would be rid of the girl, and she could convince herself that she had done a good deed by giving Aisha a home, even if it was with someone who appeared to have little. She would be free from the burden of her stepdaughter, and Aisha would no longer be her concern. It seemed like the perfect plan. Aisha, however, could feel something was amiss. The thought of being sent away to a stranger, a man she had never met and knew nothing about, filled her with dread. Her heart sank as her stepmother casually mentioned her new home, the place she would now be sent to. She could feel the walls closing in around her. How could this be happening? Where would she go? What would life be like with this stranger? These questions buzzed in her mind, but no answers came. She had no choice but to obey. As her stepmother coldly packed her belongings, Aisha's eyes welled up with tears. The home she had known, the small, familiar corners that had once been her sanctuary, were slipping away from her. The reality of leaving hit her like a wave, overwhelming her with sadness and fear. She didn't want to leave, didn't want to live with someone she didn't know, someone who might not care for her the way a family should. Yet, all she could do was stay silent, unable to argue against her stepmother's decision. And so, with a heavy heart, Aisha was handed over to Ali, the man who, at that moment, seemed as much a stranger to her as the life that awaited her in his small, unknown world. Aisha's first few days at Ali's small cottage were nothing like she had imagined. The house was simple, almost bare compared to the life she had once known. There were no lavish furnishings, no warmth of family members to greet her at the door, no comforting sounds of laughter or bustling activity. The walls were modest and unadorned, and the air inside felt still, as if it too had been waiting for her to arrive. The only sound in the house was the crackling of the fire in the hearth, a reminder that this place was not her home, and she was not welcome. At first, Aisha felt out of place in every sense of the word. The bed was smaller, the food simpler, and the days longer than she had ever experienced before. She missed the bustle of the village, the laughter of her friends, and even the petty squabbles with her stepmother. But here, in this isolated corner of the world, there was nothing but quiet. The first night she spent alone in the small room, she cried herself to sleep, overwhelmed by the sense of abandonment that seemed to suffocate her. Ali, however, never treated her with the coldness she had come to expect. In the mornings, he would gently knock on her door and bring her a cup of warm tea, asking her if she had slept well, as though it mattered to him. He didn't rush her, didn't force her to help with the chores right away. Instead, he would sit with her for a while, listening to her talk if she wanted, or allowing her the silence she needed when she felt overwhelmed. His presence was quiet, but it carried an unmistakable warmth. Aisha noticed that he never raised his voice, never seemed irritated, even when things didn't go as planned. There was a calm, unhurried rhythm to his life that she couldn't quite understand, but somehow it made her feel at ease. In contrast to the harsh, judgmental atmosphere she had known with her stepmother, Ali's kindness was like a balm to her wounded heart. He didn't demand anything from her. Instead, he allowed her to take her time, to heal from the shock of everything she had been through. He would often smile and tell her stories of his past, stories of a faraway place, of travels, of adventures that seemed impossible for someone who appeared to be so simple. His eyes would light up when he spoke of the places he had visited, the people he had met, and Aisha couldn't help but feel a little less lonely in his presence. Though he never mentioned his past in too much detail, there was always a sense that there was more to him than met the eye. As days turned into weeks, Aisha slowly adjusted to her new life. The once stark, unfamiliar surroundings began to feel less like a prison and more like a refuge. She found herself becoming more curious about Ali, noticing small things that made him seem different from what he appeared. There was a calm authority in the way he spoke to people in the village, as though they respected him without question. He would often go into town to sell his wares or purchase supplies, and when he did, people greeted him with a mixture of respect and quiet admiration. It was almost as if they knew something about him that Aisha didn't, something that she couldn't quite figure out. One day, while Ali was talking to the blacksmith in the village, Aisha overheard part of their conversation. The blacksmith was asking Ali about a particular piece of land that had recently come up for sale. Ali responded in a manner that surprised Aisha. He spoke with such authority, as if he had the power to buy anything in the village without a second thought. Yet, When the blacksmith mentioned the price, Ali simply smiled and said, "I'm not interested in buying land. I already own more than I need." Aisha's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors of wealthy landowners in the area, but she never expected Ali to be one of them. The following day, Aisha saw Ali talking to a group of villagers who were asking for his advice on a business matter. He spoke to them with such ease, offering practical solutions that impressed everyone around him. Yet he never made it obvious that he knew more than the others. He simply helped without making anyone feel inferior. This behavior puzzled Aisha. How could someone who seemed so humble, so disconnected from the world of wealth and power, hold such influence over people? There was something mysterious about Ali, something that seemed to extend far beyond the simple life he led. She began to wonder, who was he really? What was it that made him so respected, so different from everyone else in the village? As her curiosity grew, Aisha couldn't help but feel both drawn to Ali and uneasy about the secrets he was hiding. He had been kind to her, offering her a life of simplicity, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made her think he wasn't the poor, humble man he appeared to be. And so, every day, as she spent more time with him, her curiosity about his true identity only deepened. What if the life she had been forced into was just the beginning of something far greater than she could have imagined? The days in Ali's cottage continued to flow quietly, yet they were far from uneventful. Aisha had begun to settle into a rhythm, finding comfort in the simplicity of her new life. However, as the weeks passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ali than met the eye. His actions, his mannerisms, and the respect people in the village had for him all seemed to hint at something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. The first hint came when she saw him interact with the village's blacksmith. Ali had come to the blacksmith shop to pick up a tool he had ordered, and as usual, the blacksmith greeted him warmly. But what caught Aisha's attention was how the blacksmith treated him, not as a mere villager, but as someone with authority. When Ali arrived, the blacksmith, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, immediately stopped working, wiping his hands on his apron and offering Ali a seat. It wasn't the usual casual exchange she'd seen between villagers. There was a certain deference in the blacksmith's behavior, a subtle sign of respect that Aisha found puzzling. Later, as she walked by the shop, she overheard a conversation between the blacksmith and a local merchant. They were discussing a piece of land that had recently been sold, and to Aisha's surprise, the blacksmith mentioned Ali in passing. It's a good thing Ali didn't want the property. If he had, there wouldn't have been any competition. The man could buy the entire valley if he wanted to, the blacksmith said, his voice filled with admiration. Aisha's steps faltered as she overheard the words, a chill running through her. Buy the entire valley. She couldn't reconcile this with the image of the simple man she had come to know. Ali had never spoken of wealth or property, yet the villagers seemed to regard him as someone with far more power and influence than a poor man should possess. That night, her curiosity gnawed at her. She could no longer ignore the suspicions that had been building. Over the next few days, Aisha began to pay closer attention to Ali, hoping to uncover more clues about his past. As she observed him more carefully, she noticed other things that didn't quite add up. For instance, when they would go into town together, Ali always paid for their supplies without question and without hesitation. He never flinched at prices, never seemed concerned about spending. He handled money like it was something he had in abundance. Yet when she asked him about his work or his life, he would simply shrug it off, offering vague, non-committal answers. One evening, Aisha was walking near the river when she saw Ali in the distance talking to a stranger. The man, dressed in fine clothes, appeared to be from a faraway place, and Ali greeted him as if they were old friends. Their conversation was casual at first, but Aisha overheard the stranger ask Ali about an important business matter. "Is everything set for the merger? Will the contracts be signed this week?" the stranger asked, his tone both respectful and eager. Aisha's heart raced. Merger, contracts. These were not words a poor man would use. She stood frozen, hidden behind a tree, as Ali nodded and replied with a calm, authoritative voice. Yes, everything will be in place. Just make sure you're ready for the meeting. I'll be expecting the paperwork soon. The man nodded eagerly, and before Aisha could hear any more, the stranger turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned and confused. She had seen enough. Ali wasn't just a humble man living off the land. There was something far greater at play here. But why would he hide it? Why was he so determined to downplay his true identity? Aisha couldn't understand it, but one thing was certain. Ali's life was far from what it seemed. The next day, Aisha decided to confront him. She had to know the truth. But Ali was as elusive as ever, dodging any direct questions she asked about his past. Instead, he continued to speak of the simple life, the joys of living in peace, and the fulfillment of working with his hands. Every time she tried to press him, he would smile gently and change the subject. It was as if he knew what she was thinking, but was determined not to reveal anything. Yet, there were moments when his mask slipped, and Aisha could see it. His control, his restraint. Ali was holding something back, something that kept him from fully opening up to her. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ali looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Aisha," he said softly, "I know you're curious about me, but some things are better left in the past. I have no intention of going back to that life. I'm here now, and that's all that matters." His words were simple, yet there was a weight to them, a heaviness that made Aisha wonder just how much he was concealing. Despite his reassurances, Aisha couldn't shake the feeling that the more she learned about him, the more she uncovered a side of Ali that he was desperate to keep hidden. There were too many clues, too many unanswered questions. The more she saw, the more she realized that the man who had taken her in, the man who treated her with such kindness and respect, was not just a poor, humble man living a quiet life. Ali had a past, a powerful one, and whether he liked it or not, that past would eventually catch up with him. And Aisha would be there, ready to uncover the truth, piece by piece. The days turned into weeks, and the stepmother's life seemed to carry on as usual, until the rumors started. At first they were whispers in the market, faint mentions of Aisha's new life with Ali, a man who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. It was easy to dismiss them, as they didn't seem to mean much. But as the stories began to circulate, the stepmother found herself listening more closely. Her curiosity piqued. There were murmurs about how Ali was respected by everyone in the village, not just as a humble worker, but as someone with influence. People spoke of how he could get things done, how when he spoke, others listened. The more the stepmother heard, the more she began to regret her decision. She had assumed that giving Aisha to a poor man would rid her of her burdens without consequence. But now, the picture was becoming clearer, and it wasn't what she had envisioned. She couldn't help but wonder if she had made a mistake. Had she sent Aisha to a man who was more than just a poor, solitary figure? The thought nagged at her, filling her with doubt. If only she had known more about him, she would have never let her stepdaughter go so easily. What if Ali wasn't poor after all? What if he had some hidden wealth, some secret influence that could change everything for Aisha? What if, in trying to rid herself of a burden, she had actually handed Aisha over to someone far more powerful than she could have ever imagined? One evening, as she sat alone in her house, her thoughts consumed by what she had heard, a visitor arrived at her doorstep. It was an older man, a village elder she recognized from the council meetings, a man with a kind face but a tone that hinted at urgency. He had come to talk to her about Aisha, or rather about what was happening with her since she had been sent away. "Have you heard the news?" the elder asked, his voice quiet but full of concern. "People are saying that Ali is not what he seems. There are rumors about his wealth, his connections to powerful families. He's not just some simple man living on the outskirts of the village. The stepmother's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to hide the anxiety creeping into her voice. The elder lowered his voice further, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear. "There's talk that he's connected to some influential people, even in the city. Some say he was once a businessman, and some say he's related to powerful landowners. But no one really knows for sure. All I know is that people who've dealt with him, well, they don't treat him like someone without means." The stepmother sat back in her chair, stunned by the news. Could it be true? Had she unknowingly sent Aisha to a man who had power and wealth? What if Ali had an agenda? And what if Aisha was now caught in something much bigger than she could have ever imagined? Her mind raced, and for the first time since sending Aisha away, a flicker of doubt crossed her thoughts. The elder's words haunted her in the days that followed. She couldn't stop thinking about them. Her mind began to spin with the possibilities. If Ali wasn't who he seemed, then Aisha might not be in the simple, humble life she had thought. The man who had appeared so harmless, so inconspicuous, could be someone entirely different. In an attempt to understand more, the stepmother took a risk. One day, she visited Ali's cottage, intending to talk to him, to perhaps get a sense of who he truly was. She wanted to see with her own eyes if the rumors were true. As she approached his house, something caught her eye, a letter lying half hidden in the dirt near the edge of the garden. She picked it up, its wax seal broken, revealing the faded, elegant script inside. The letter was addressed to Ali, but it was the seal that took her by surprise. It was the same crest she had seen on the business papers of a prominent family in the city, a family known for its wealth and power. Her heart raced as she read through the letter quickly. It spoke of a meeting, of business dealings that were clearly far beyond the means of someone living in a remote village. This was it, the first true clue to Ali's real identity. The man who had seemed so humble, so unassuming, was connected to a world she had never even imagined. The stepmother's heart sank. She had made a terrible mistake, and now it was too late to take it back. Ali was no ordinary man, and neither was Aisha's future. Her mind raced with new plans, schemes to bring Aisha back, but it was already clear things had changed. Aisha was no longer the frightened, lonely girl she had been when she was sent away. And Ali, whatever his true identity was no longer someone the stepmother could control. The day had finally come when the truth about Ali's past was about to be revealed, and it unfolded in a way that none of them could have ever anticipated. The signs had been there, buried beneath layers of secrecy and quiet humility. But it was only when everything came together that Aisha, and even the stepmother, could begin to understand who Ali truly was. It happened one afternoon when a letter arrived at Ali's cottage, sealed with the same crest that the stepmother had found in the letter she had picked up. Aisha was sitting by the fire when Ali came in, holding the envelope in his hand, his face unreadable. The air between them was thick with anticipation. Ali glanced at Aisha, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. A sorrow, a burden, perhaps a quiet acceptance of what was about to come. "You've been asking questions, Aisha," he said softly, his voice more serious than she had ever heard it. "It's time I tell you the truth." Aisha's heart raced. She had known something was hidden, but she never expected this moment to come so suddenly. She braced herself, unsure of what he was going to say, but knowing that her life, and perhaps her entire understanding of her world, was about to change. Ali sat down across from her and opened the letter with a steady hand. As he read, his face softened, but there was an undeniable sadness in his expression. When he finished, he folded the letter slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "I am not the man you think I am, Aisha," he began. "I am not just a poor man living out here in the wilderness. I am the son of a wealthy merchant family, one of the most powerful families in the city." Aisha blinked, stunned. But you never told me." Ali held up his hand, cutting her off gently. I chose to live like this, Aisha. I walked away from my life of wealth and status a long time ago. My father wanted me to follow in his footsteps, to take over the family business, to live a life of luxury and power. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't bear the thought of a life ruled by money and greed. So, I left everything behind. I moved here to start over, to live simply, and to find peace in a life that wasn't defined by wealth or influence. Aisha was silent for a moment, her mind spinning with the weight of his words. She had known something was different about Ali, but she never imagined he was someone of such importance. Yet his reasons for leaving his life of affluence were what truly struck her. He wasn't just some lonely, poor man. By circumstance, he had deliberately chosen to reject everything he had been born into. "But why did you take me in?" Aisha asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why me? What did I ever do to deserve your help?" Ali looked at her with a gentle smile, his eyes softening with an emotion that Aisha couldn't quite place. "You see, Aisha, I knew your father. He was a good man, a man who believed in integrity and honesty, and I respected him greatly. When I left my family, I made a vow to honor his memory. Your father did me a great favor once, and I promised I would repay him. When I heard about your situation, I knew I couldn't let you fall into the hands of someone who would mistreat you. Your stepmother may have seen you as a burden, but I saw potential in you. I saw someone with strength, someone who deserved better than the life she was being forced into." Aisha was taken aback. She had never known that her father had connections with someone so powerful, someone who had cared for her even when she hadn't known it. Ali's words filled her heart with warmth and a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. He hadn't just taken her in out of pity or charity. He had seen something in her, something that no one else had ever recognized. As if sensing her mixed emotions, Ali continued, "I've been living humbly for years now, trying to keep my true identity hidden. The people here know me as Ali, the humble worker, and that's how I prefer it. But now, I think it's time for the truth to come out." And so, the truth began to unravel, not only for Aisha, but for her stepmother as well. The stepmother, unaware of what had been unfolding, was about to find out the hard way just how wrong she had been. She had been plotting to reclaim Aisha, to bring her back under her control, not realizing that the man she had so easily dismissed as a poor, insignificant figure was someone with far more influence than she could comprehend. One evening, the stepmother showed up at Ali's cottage, determined to take Aisha back. She had heard whispers of Ali's true identity and, in her desperation, had decided to confront him directly. She knocked on the door with urgency in her step, hoping to catch him off guard and force him to let Aisha go. When Ali opened the door, the stepmother stood there, her face a mask of determination. "I've come to take Aisha back. She doesn't belong here, living this life. She belongs with me, in her rightful place." Ali didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "You've made a grave mistake, but I will not force you to stay. I am not here to keep Aisha from you. But know this, you don't control her anymore." The stepmother, stunned by his calm demeanor, couldn't hide the fear creeping into her heart. "What do you mean? You don't have the right—" Ali's gaze hardened. "I am the rightful heir to a family with wealth and influence. Your scheming won't change that, and you have no idea what I am capable of. I've lived in the shadows long enough, but I will not let you hurt Aisha anymore." The stepmother's face went pale. The words seemed to cut through her, as if the foundation of her world had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. She had underestimated him, had seen him as nothing more than a poor, humble man. But now, the truth was undeniable. As Ali spoke, Aisha stood behind him, her heart swelling with a mixture of disbelief and awe. The man who had taken her in, treated her with kindness, and given her a chance at a better life, was not just a humble worker, he was a powerful figure with a past she couldn't even begin to fathom. And now, for the first time, Aisha understood. Her life had changed forever. The truth had shattered the illusion the stepmother had so carefully built around herself. When Ali revealed his true identity, the stepmother, who had long believed she could control every aspect of Aisha's life, was left with nothing. The reality of her own manipulations began to weigh on her, and she felt the walls of her power slowly crumble around her. She had never expected to face such consequences for her actions, and now, standing in front of Ali, she realized just how badly she had underestimated him, and Aisha. The power she once wielded, whether through her cunning or her cruelty, had no effect now. Ali's words, quiet and unwavering, cut through her defenses like a sharp blade. "I won't let you use Aisha anymore," Ali had said when she tried to make excuses, her face flushed with anger. "You've made her life miserable, and I will not let you continue to destroy her spirit." The stepmother, whose entire world had been built on manipulation and deceit, could only watch as Aisha, the girl she had tried to cast aside, stood before her, now surrounded by someone who valued her and recognized her worth. She had lost control, and more than that, she had lost Aisha forever. With the truth now out, the stepmother was forced to reckon with the consequences of her cruelty. Her reputation in the village began to tarnish as word spread about how she had mistreated Aisha. The villagers, once passive about her behavior, now saw her for what she truly was: a woman who had discarded a vulnerable girl for her own selfish gains. The once stronghold she had over the community began to loosen. People no longer feared her. Instead, they pitied her. And that was a fate far worse than any punishment. The stepmother found herself alone, abandoned by those who once supported her. She had nothing left. Aisha, on the other hand, began to transform in ways she had never imagined. The girl who had once been silenced by her stepmother's cruelty, the girl who had been made to feel small and insignificant, now stood tall, empowered by the truth and by Ali's unwavering support. For the first time, she saw herself for who she truly was, not just a victim, but a young woman with strength, potential, and the ability to shape her own destiny. As the days passed, Aisha began to embrace the life she had with Ali. No longer bound by the suffocating fear of her stepmother's control, she began to take charge of her future. She helped Ali with his work in the village, and slowly, as she learned from him, she found her own voice. Her confidence grew as she realized that the world, despite its challenges, was full of opportunities she could seize if only she believed in herself. Ali, ever patient and supportive, watched with quiet pride as Aisha blossomed into someone who was not just strong, but wise beyond her years. He had seen her potential from the very beginning, even when she had not recognized it herself. Now, as she began to take on new responsibilities and challenges with an unshakable resolve, he knew that she was capable of greatness. It was no longer just about rescuing her, it was about empowering her to be the woman she was meant to be. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Ali spoke gently, his voice filled with sincerity. "Aisha," he began, his tone more serious than usual, "you've become someone I never expected, someone who inspires me with her strength, her courage, and her heart. I'm proud of you. You've come so far from the girl who was uncertain of her place in the world." Aisha met his gaze, her eyes soft, but filled with gratitude. She had never known someone to believe in her so fully, to see her for who she could become, not just who she was at the time. Ali's unwavering faith in her had helped her unlock a part of herself she never knew existed. And in that moment, she realized just how much he had changed her life, not just by taking her in, but by encouraging her to embrace her own power. Ali paused for a moment, his gaze steady. "I want you to know something, Aisha," he continued, his words measured but filled with emotion. "You don't need anyone's permission to be who you are. Not mine, not your stepmother's. you've already proven that you are capable of more than most people could ever dream of. Aisha's heart swelled as she listened. She had grown so much, not just because of what Ali had given her, but because of what she had found within herself. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen, for all her potential. Ali smiled softly, his expression both proud and hopeful. You can have whatever future you want, Aisha. If you want to stay here and continue working alongside me, I would be honored. But if you want to go out and build something even greater, something beyond what we have here, I will support you. The world is yours. Aisha felt a surge of emotion. She had once feared being alone, of never being able to carve out her own space in the world. But now, with Ali's encouragement, she understood that she didn't need to rely on anyone to define her future. The power was in her hands, and for the first time, she was ready to take it. "Thank you, Ali," she whispered, her voice trembling with both gratitude and a newfound sense of purpose. I think I'm ready to start a new chapter, one where I control my own fate." Ali's smile deepened, and in that moment Aisha knew that her journey had just begun. She had the power to shape her own life, to become the woman she'd always dreamed of being. And while her past had been full of pain, her future was now bright with possibilities. As the night fell and the fire crackled softly, Aisha felt a sense of peace she had never known. The stepmother, once a symbol of her oppression, was no longer a threat. The chains had been broken, and she was free, not just from her stepmother, but from every limitation she had once imposed on herself. The world was hers to conquer. Aisha stood at the edge of a new beginning, the weight of her past now lightened by the strength she had discovered within herself. The girl who had once been burdened by rejection and mistreatment was no longer the same person. She had grown, not just in confidence, but in wisdom and self-respect. The life she had been handed, full of hardships and pain, had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She had learned to rise above it all, to embrace her potential, and to carve out a future of her own making. The village, once a place of uncertainty and fear, now felt like home. With Ali by her side, she no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance, but as a young woman capable of great things. The simple life she had once feared now seemed full of opportunities she was ready to seize with both hands. Aisha had learned to trust herself, to believe in her worth, and most importantly, to know that she could shape her own destiny. Ali's role in her life, though significant, was now that of a guide, someone who had helped her find her path, but had never sought to control it. He had been a beacon of light during her darkest days, but now, Aisha no longer needed a savior. She was her own savior, and with the lessons he had imparted, she was ready to walk her own path. Still, there was no denying the bond between them, a bond built on mutual respect, kindness, and understanding. As she looked out across the horizon, Aisha knew that her journey was just beginning. There was much more ahead, and while the future remained uncertain, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. The man who had once been a stranger, a humble figure in her life, had become more than just a protector. He had become someone she admired, someone whose influence would continue to guide her, but without stifling her independence. The future was bright, and Aisha was no longer afraid to walk toward it. What would come next for Aisha? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. She was no longer a girl lost in the shadows. She was a woman ready to step into the light, and whatever the future held, she would meet it head on.